I own one. Done. It's amazing. We come out to Vegas, 120 degrees, and how many of us are wearing solid black? And we're in this field and supposed to be smart. And the rules for this, if you want to get up and do stuff, and pee and get drinks and all that, please feel free. I'm not insulted as long as you do come back. If you want to tweet, photo, anything you want to do, it's all cool. It's completely open source, and it's all good. Audio is fine from back over there. This is meant to be interactive and for you to beat the shit out of me. There's some ideas I've been working on for a number of years, getting ready to publish. And before I do, you guys are the last round of beat the crap out of me. Are there any holes, flaws? And so it's up to you. And if not, you're all going to sign off that, yes, we approve. There will also be questions throughout it. If you answer the question correctly, you'll receive something of virtually no value. If you answer it wrong, you give me $20. That's because I'm doing this for free. So, any questions about the rules? Cool. All right, analog network security. Every time I tell somebody, oh, that's what I'm talking about, they go, what the fuck? Which is the desired result. And I'm going to take you down some paths that maybe you haven't been down before. And I found over the last several years, when I start thinking about stuff in our space, and I put on these lenses, so to speak, I actually have a set being built for me in Holland, I come up with different answers, very radically different answers than what we traditionally are doing in network security right now. So I'm going to be right maybe about some stuff. I'm going to be wrong about other stuff, and you guys have to point all that out. It's about thinking differently. You're not going to come out of here and say, I'm going to go buy the next generation analog, whatever, whatever. It's not going to happen. This is a theory. It's a framework. It's an architecture in order to solve the problem that we're in right now, which we're all heavily aware of for all the wonderful reasons. If you sign up for the book, you'll get super discounts and whatever. So end of sales pitch. But this is what it's coming out sometime in January. We're expecting it out for RSA. So the world as it is today, shit's broken. I look back at TCPIP, and that was just an experiment. And now we're running the damn planet on something that we know is inherently flawed. Are we going to change all of that? No. TCPIP is here to live. IPv6 is what, 20% deployed, 40%, something like that? And it's not a hell of a huge improvement because it has some of the same fundamental flaws that we're going to get into and how to solve some of them, hopefully. Vendors, if there's vendors in here, sorry, I'm going to beat the crap out of you because all this new shit, the next how many next generations have we had? And it's like the next generation is no better than the last crappy one you put out, and it's solving the problem the wrong way. This time it'll really work. Thank you for that. That's not a question, not an answer. You get nothing from me. I started out young doing television repair work. Analogue World. My father worked on the radar systems development for Bell Labs during World War II. My mother was the first analog audio engineer at NBC at 30 Rock back during the war, and I grew up with all of this crap, and by the time we were 5 years old, we had to know how to fix a television. That was just the nature of growing up in the tube-based analog days of the 50s. If you couldn't fix it, you certainly could not afford to hire somebody to fix it. So it was just part of the deal. The other thing that happened to me very young is I got discriminated against by both Bell Labs and IBM because I was a smart kid out of school, wanted to go become a researcher, wanted them to pay for my education, all of this kind of cool stuff, which was normal back in those days. Final test, 2048 twisted pair color cable from the phone company. I'm colorblind. So I got thrown out of both Bell Labs and IBM and ended up going to do something entirely different. I grew up in analog rock and roll, hanging out with these guys, recording all of the stuff. My father was in the business. He produced Bob Dylan, Peter, Paul, and Shithead later on. And then I got involved with early analog Moog synthesizer stuff. And I actually built, that was an analog computer I built, I think I was like 8 years old. Didn't do a whole hell of a lot, but it taught me a good amount about electronics. So that's kind of where I come from, thinking analog, and then I ended up in digital for the first time in the audio automation days in the mid-70s. And there's a couple things we're going to talk about that as well. So, analog. Is it analog? Is the network secure? Is that an analog function or a digital function? Is the network secure? Analog or digital? Both. You're just echoing his answer, right? You have no idea. Who said both? Why? Why is it both? Sorry? Security should be inherent. Is a network secure? Is it a binary function or an analog function? Why? It's a continuum. We don't know. Is there 100% security ever? All of us would argue absolutely not, and we're going to get into some of the math on this, so bring out your calculators. Will a lawyer screw you? Is that analog or digital? That's digital. Fuck yeah, he's going to screw you. Speeds limits, are they analog or digital? Yeah, there's suggestions, right? Let's see. A movie, is it analog or digital? Come on, no. Is it analog? What? It depends. It depends. It's analog? Why is it analog? Is the movie itself analog or digital? Well? Sorry? It can be included either way. No, it can't. Movies, video is always done on frames. The frames are set in such a way so that the human perception, and this is not a computer, this is the best averaging machine in the known universe, averages it out, not in the eye, but in one of the sets of neurons that make all this stuff work. And it's called synaptic weighting, is the current theory. So, music is analog, video is digital, that we perceive as analog. So when you get one of those TVs that has like 480 frame rate and it looks like really bizarre, it's because we're seeing stuff we're not used to seeing. The brain sees things in an analog world. So when you start thinking about things, just ask yourself or your partners over drinks, when they say a statement, is it analog or digital? Just ask that question. And it'll start you on the road to looking at the world a little bit differently, sort of the way I do. Analog is about continuously variable. Now, we do get into some funny areas here, but the prototypical digital is the square wave, but a square wave is not really digital, it's really analog anyway, because when you zoom in, you've got an angle coming up, you've got ringing signals going, you've got all this noise stuff going on. So fundamentally, a square wave is an analog function as well. But due to granularity concerns, we treat it as a digital signal. Analog, obviously, completely different and continuously variable. Now, somebody mentioned a word earlier we're going to get into. What we're going to be looking at is granularity. Because at some point, the differentiation between analog and digital is meaningless, depending upon the level of granularity of the sensor-based portion of the network. Whether that is your brain, whether it is a potentiometer, whether it is an analog-digital, digital-analog converter, it's all about granularity. Good audio has high granularity. Shitty MP4 audio in 8-bit sounds like crap, or the old Atari machines back from the 80s. So it's all about granularity along a continuum and how we're sampling that information and interpreting it. A continuum is completely analog as well. If to say something is red is almost meaningless. You can define it by CMYKs, RGBs, you can give the various intensities there, each of which is a granularized digital function that we create as an analog ultimately as these things are blended together. Now, one of the things that is very interesting about analog, and I don't get too far into this, is analog is really, really, really easy to mix and combine shit. Digital is really, really, really hard to combine stuff. So, music, perfect example. I got a trombone. Okay, now let's add a trumpet, let's add a drum, let's add a bass. And these circuits are mind-blowingly simple to be able to make them work. In the digital world, it is exceedingly complex. So, again, in this world, we go into, we kind of say as an EE guys, DC to light, meaning DC, static voltage at all time, there is zero change. 1 cycle per second, 4 cycles on up to terahertz. We don't know how far, what the upper limit is right now. So somewhere in all of this, there are frequencies that determine the granularity, again, of its position within the continuum. Now, as I grew up in the music industry, I also have another dysfunction called synesthesia. When I hear music, that's what I see, which was really, really useful when I was in the music business producing and engineering records. Because to me, I could see the harmony, and visually and sonically, when they matched each other, I knew I was onto something that was called a good mix. Everything balanced well. You can visualize dissonance just the same way you can hear dissonance. And so I found this to be a very useful tool, and it crossed my senses. So it was different, and we didn't know what it was back in the 70s. But now we have a fair clue. I also argue that the internet is an analog right now. Again, this gets back to granularity. How far are we diving in? Are we looking at just one device out of 7 billion, not including IoT at this point? Or are we looking at the fuzzy, amorphous behavior and growth and operation and activity that is going on within the internet? Depends upon our viewpoint, whether we can view this whole thing as an analog function, and when we start zooming in, back to granularity, then we start looking at it in more of a digital way. Now, if this sounds a little Heisenbergish to you, there is a wave-particle duality issue exactly going on here. What are we looking at? Depends how you view it. And as I did research into looking at analog network security, the parallels between that and quantum physics actually started to appear, that we don't have to be either one. We can be both, depending upon what we're trying to achieve. The brain obviously is analog, but it's a different kind of analog. It's called synaptic weighting, and we're building some cool circuits now to do that kind of stuff in the labs. And basically, it's an averaging technique of analog signals coming into the brain, which are then weighted, and decision trees are made based upon, the decisions in the decision trees are made based upon the weighting factors. We're now doing a huge amount of bio stuff, prosthetics. Is it analog? Is it digital? In this case, it's truly a hybrid, because we've got an awful lot of digital crap going on over here, but the sensors and the interfaces have to work with us, and we are analog beings. So there's an awful lot of work being done naturally in many areas of engineering and disciplines, from healthcare on down, and I'll show you some of these later, that are intrinsically analog. Where is analog in network security? Do we have any? Other than saying we have no fucking idea what's going on. Is there any analog? So I'm going to be trying to present to you 8 different concepts from the analog world, and when they start merging together, answers appear, which I found very enlightening. So we have to go back a little bit of history to understand why we're sort of in the mess we're in. Early security models were developed from 1972, Anderson, and then you have Bellapogolo and Biba, and they were all very, very digitally oriented, obviously. They had a mainframe over in a room and a wire to a green screen, 80 by 25 text, and that was it. It was an asynchronous transfer mechanism by and large. Because the DoD was the lead in the research in this, they took a very militaristic view. How high can we build the damn walls to keep the bad guys out? That's sort of what we're still doing today, 45 years later. When we know it didn't work in the physical world, Maginot Line, how'd that go for the French? What line? The Germans did exactly what social engineers do. Oh, they got a firewall? Fuck it, I'm going to go to the human. Hello? Not exactly difficult. But we're still trying to build the next generation, gonna keep the bad guys out of my network. Failed. Completely failed. Yet, the static security model, fortress mentality, even when you apply defense in depth, you get the moat, you get the wall, you get the guys, the swords, the boiling oil, all that shit. Castles still got seized. Part of the nature of the beast. Sooner or later, the defenses are going to be breached in the physical world, and we're certainly seeing this in the logical world. The concept of risk avoidance was really big in the DoD's mind, and when we talk to our CISOs and you're doing your management porn for these guys, how do we avoid risk is a common question. Another binary question that does not have a binary answer. What do you mean by risk? How are you measuring your risk? Where are the metrics that you're using? Where does it sit on the continuum? Are you doing a probabilistic view of it? What is your internal metric system? And this gentleman, Alan, and I got talking, just met him, and it was like, wow, we got to talk some more on this shit, because and I'm not an expert in his area. But this is fundamentally what we have been doing. Take a read at this. It's the only slide with a lot of words. It was written, what, yesterday, a couple weeks ago? Everybody saw this in the paper a couple weeks ago? 1972. What's changed? What is that? What are you, horny? Oh. Sorry. This is not DEF CON. I don't have to be politically correct, right? All right, cool. 1972. Anderson's paper, if you have not read it, it's about 200 pages long. 1972, it is freaking brilliant for what it was in its day. Mainframe, asynchronous communication, green screen. That was all we had in terms of technology. Then we added gates and guards. No photos, sir. No, I'm kidding. Why do they listen to me? So what Anderson came up with and delineated was this process called the reference monitor. We still use it today, unfortunately. Real simple. And this is whether we're at the code level, application level, network. Well, they didn't have networks then, so the original model was designed for code and applications. Got some request, stop the process, whether it's an ACT or some sort of rule-based table, make a decision based upon object, subject, identities, simple stuff, deny, permit, go, no go, continue on. Very, very simple. Brilliant in its simplicity. Again, this was 1972. So, 1983, the Department of Defense issues the Orange Book. How many people have read the Orange Book? Cover to cover? How many times? Once? Oh, God, we lived in that thing in the 80s. And the Orange Book basically took this concept, took a little Bell LaPage, a little Biba, added confidentiality, integrity modeling, and developed an architecture and a general theoretical framework by which we still are living today. Yet we know it doesn't work. So this is really, really good for that mainframe model. What happens if I put in synchronous communications and apply this? Anybody, what happens if I put in synchronous comm? Why does it break? Every single how many files open when you open Word today? Is that an analog or a digital question? I don't know. It's a shitload. And again, synchronous communication. This is an asynchronous channel. I'm going to have a repeat in the other direction to make it synchronous. What happens to my traffic flow? What? Grinds to a halt. So the DoD then, who read the Red Book in '85? Oh my God. I remember reading it the first time, and I said, I got to read this piece of shit again, because I don't get it. And bottom line is, at the end of the Red Book, it says, we have no idea how to secure a network. Where are we today? Nothing has changed, because they're taking the same approaches. So, let's talk about beer. That means yay, beer. Yeah, good, all right. I went to Poland to do a talk in '95, right after the wall came down and they'd opened up to some Western ideas. And a buddy and I sat down at the bar waiting for our Polish host, who showed up 11 hours late after we had just traveled 22. But we came up with a concept of time-based security. He was a DoD guy working at DISA, had been doing a lot of testing, early work in the defense networks, and came up with a concept of called protect, detect, respond, which is what a lot of people are talking about these days with some of the vendors, the evil vendors who don't still quite get it. They're using the terminology, but using it completely incorrectly because they're using it in a binary way. So, this vault, made of alien metal from Area 51. When the doors close and there are no electronics connected to this vault, are the contents secure? No? Why? How do you get through? What? Social engineering? All right. I might be able to social engineer the guy with the key, threaten his family. Let's take social engineering off the table. Is the vault secure? You tell me. From rust? Rust. All right, so we're looking at no, this is alien metal. There's no rust. I get to declare these rules. Huh. All right, so you're looking at 1 trillion years down the line. Go back to management porn. 1 trillion years, no shit. All right, we take the lights out. Aliens, what? Well, this is alien metal. What we find in the physical world is pretty simple. They rate it. Temperature and time are the rating factors for physical constraint systems. That's all. Do we have any of that in network security? A little bit. Where? All right, so we can crack a password in X hours. Good. Anything else? That's an attack, not a defense. Right. Yes, it is. In certain cryptographic systems, absolutely. DHS is rating technology. What? DHS is rating security. I understand they've been trying to do that. It's basically a spin-off of the old NCSC stuff, Orange Book, Red Book, now the CC, Common Criteria, and they're doing the EF stuff. And again, it's not a binary function. It's a, we hope to hell we're right decision. Back in the days when all of this stuff was being initially formalized, with the Orange Book, Red Book, Anderson, all these guys, there was a mathematical formalization that proved security. And it worked. It absolutely worked. It was all the way up to the A1 system, which was the most secure in the world. And it was impenetrable, never proven anything but mathematically 100% secure, using fundamentally this approach. Now, I use the word time because time is where we're really going to start playing around. So, is time analog or digital? Ooh, who said ooh? Well, I'm asking you. You don't know. Who knows? What is time? We're not going philosophy there, Dumont. Is time analog or digital? Planck says it's digital, and one of my sides says we're not playing Planck. Planck is, in fact, it was off. Planck on the continuum, I said, no, we're not going Planck on you. He's absolutely correct. Time is a purely analog function until you get down to Planck's distance and Planck's time of 10 to the minus 43rd. We're not going there. We're not going there because we're still in 10 to the minus 12 to minus 18 land. So, but we're going to examine this from a time standpoint. So, we talked about rating. Can you rate this firewall? DHS gave it a high rating. Vendors. The best that we got now is the EF scale on the CC. And a lot of that is guesswork. Pure guesswork, no formalization whatsoever. Ask any vendor out there. Just have fun with vendors. You got a great firewall there. How many hours or days will it protect me against a bad guy attacking? They hate that question. Because ultimately, that is what we're talking about. And why shit is going over to 92% of APTs are occurring through social engineering. Because the technology is just a dumb barrier. It's not really doing much other than saying, go to the back door. Don't come through the front door. It's a diversion. So the question then comes up. We've spent, what, $3 trillion in the last 30 years. Firewalls, passwords, routers, AC, all this crap that we do. And things have gotten a boatload better, haven't they? $3 trillion. We have to assume the bad guys are already in our networks? After 35 years and $3 trillion, that's the answer? That's our starting point. The bad guys are already inside. So I make the argument, and it's a little flippant, and I'm not suggesting it in reality, but do we really need protection? Why do we have to have firewalls at all? Well, that's taking it to an extreme. And I'm not suggesting that, because they are doing a job. However, we can't rely on protection for all sorts of dizzying reasons that are all common sense. Just because today you passed a pen test on some portion of your network that has certain sets of criteria, constraints for rules of engagement, what does it have to do with what's happening tomorrow? Again, time, tomorrow. Back to that analog function of the universe changing, the internet changing, the conditions within your network application all changing over time. So for all these reasons, protection, we know, doesn't work in the way that we have been trying to for many, many years. Can't measure it. But what portion of our network can we explicitly measure? We can measure two things. We can measure detection. We know, if the vendors would help us out in this one, how long it takes to look at a hunk of code and tell us the likelihood of it having something malware-ish in it. There's some number, whether it's 3 weeks, 1 second, or 1 nanosecond. I don't know what the number is, but there is a number. The other thing that you guys can do right now, and a lot of companies have actually started playing with recently, build your own code and run a simulated attack and measure your vendor's stuff. How long does it take? How long does it take for them to say, yeah, it's good, no, it's bad, with whatever the level of accuracy, 98.3%, whatever their numbers are. You can do this today, and there'll be a number that comes up. So in a network, right now, we have some detection mechanisms, and whether it's at the IDS or IPS, it's somewhere in there. I don't think I've ever seen from any vendor the qualification of the metrics of how it works over time. Because that's ultimately what I'm going to care about, and hopefully at the end of this, you're going to care about more than anything else. The other thing that we can measure is reaction. So, when you get a notice from your IDS, IPS, MOUSE, whatever it is, what happens? Is it an automatic reaction? Does it dial up and text the admin of that particular area? How long does that take for that communication to occur? Oh, he's at the bathroom. He's out to lunch. He's on vacation. We forgot to forward it to his assistant. How long does it take? You can measure this now. And then the third component of that, of course, is mitigation. Once he is notified, how long does it take to actually fix the problem in human terms to whatever level of confidence you're looking for? Right now, you have the ability to do this within your networks. If you do this, I'm going to show you some tools that are going to be kind of fun to really start looking at securing your network. But this also has a huge amount of historical truth. This is exactly what we did during the Cold War. We knew that we could sense a launch in a matter of microseconds, milliseconds, from our satellite-based systems. We then had 18.5 minutes to decide how much of the world we're going to destroy. That was the reaction. So detection in that case, milliseconds, reaction 18.5 minutes, which gave us a detection plus reaction summation of just a little over 18.5 minutes. And this is part of the beauty of time-based security, using this as a fundamental. And this part you're going to need to buy into for the rest of this. There's a real simple formula that comes out of all this. Assume I have no protection at all. I don't have any. No firewalls, no windows. If you said the window, how much protection does a window offer in a jewelry store? What? How heavy is the brick and the hammer? Exactly. It's a matter of seconds at max. But there's a detection and alarm system that it breaks, and then there's a goofy guy with a gun, and however long that takes. We know those numbers. What ends up happening is a very simple formula. I know my detection time, I know my reaction time. If the vendor, or I use self-assess, that your protective device will offer more protection when measured in time than the amount of time it takes to both detect and respond to hostility of any sort, I then have a mathematically provably secure network, or component, not network in this case. I haven't gotten there yet. I'm going everywhere. I'm going everywhere. If I don't get there, you'll bring me there. So because we have to look, because the bad guys know math. And I'm not sure it's in the slide, but it's in the book, because it gets a little really geeky when you turn these formulas upside down into attack methodologies. But yeah, so in this case, again, if I know, and I'm guaranteed that my firewall protective device, in some cases crypto, where it's mathematically provable that I know it's uncrackable for 3 cycles, 30 years, 3 trillion years, if you want to go out there, we know the math behind it. And notwithstanding NSA and some of the problems we had with DES in the early 70s on this. But crypto is a perfect example. But in our networks and applications, we're not applying this because we do not know what our protective value is. But there's a lot of ways to look at this. When you're looking at PDR, time-based security, nuclear compliance, same sort of thing. It's a detection, reaction mechanism. Very, very simple. World War III, MAD, mutually assured destruction, robberies, automatic cars. Automatic cars. We're seeing some of those out there these days, and they're sensing their environment and making high-speed, reactive decisions in order to avoid accidents so Google can sell more cars and make more money. Pain. Touch the hot stove, reaction. This is native to us as humans, and they're all analog functions that we don't apply yet in our networks. So what we're going to do is take a look at what this really means. If I'm assuming that I have no protection, then I know what my total exposure is in terms of time, which is the detection and reaction segment of the processing of looking for something bad in the network. We have a lot of this technology already in place. But what we're not doing is looking at the exposure, because we're not forcing the vendors to measure properly. So given total access to your networks, which is the D plus R, and we're assuming the bad guys are already inside, we now have a reasonable idea, taking this approach, of what our exposure is, and then you can start measuring exposure, because file size and bandwidth are time functions. I'll show you how that works in a bit. I'm sorry? You set the bandwidth to 0. Who wants this guy? Trillion years and bandwidth at 0. Same guy, right? There's your min-max conditions. We're getting there. I'm going to get you there yet. If you set the bandwidth to 0, absolutely correct answer. Alan. Mm-hmm. That's correct. Can I get there? I'm going to show you. I'm going to, but it's a few more slides and a few more hours. So, given total access to your networks, we understand and we can measure the file sizes based upon existing non-zero bandwidth of the maximum extrication, assuming my detection and reaction work properly. And those are things that we can actually measure. Now, the guys who are going to rob the big house at the top of the hill, and it's a rich house, they have to assume there's what on that house? An alarm system, which is a detection mechanism, which would then trigger a reaction and get the cops to come in however long time it takes. The amount of time that it takes shows the potential loss of value of things they can physically steal from the house in a given period of time. Not terribly sophisticated concept. But if I take PDR, time-based security, I can add additional levels of detection and reaction to a detection system. Why should an alarm system not have its own detection system to tell that it's being manipulated? And this is the concept of defense in depth that we have been using for many, many, many years as static levels of defenses. If he broke through this, fine. If he broke through this, fine. If he broke through this, fine. But turning it into a dynamic is something that we have not done yet. And it's something that we certainly can do. So, measuring which files are targets, assuming a non-zero, of course, absolutely the math falls out, and we end up determining files that are potentially vulnerable, and file sizes. So, what can we do about this? Well, we like to dim the data. In the analog world, we have a rheostat, and all this does is vary the voltage being applied to the lamp, which then would vary the current flowing through the filament, which will cause the light bulb to dim and turn up. Simple, we do it every day, dimmers, volume control, everything. If we use Ohm's law as a basic premise, we can do the same thing using bandwidth compression. And this was a concept that came out of what we do in the audio industry, which is signal compression. So in this case, the gentleman was absolutely correct. Here's my bandwidth, here's the exposure time that we're dealing with, here's data extrication based upon certain criteria, and the results become fairly obvious. So is there any reason then that one of the reactions should not be to have a device in my path somewhere? We build it into one of the routing elements, I would assume, that one of the reactions is shut down bandwidth by this factor until we know what we're dealing with. Instead of shutting down the company, turning off the website, doing this binary action that we tend to do. Say, let's go down to a lower level of performance for some period of time until the D plus R function is complete. Yes, sir? I'm sorry? We're going to address that. We have that solved. I hope. I think. You're going to tell me later. So, everything here makes sense so far? All we're doing is some bandwidth compression. And I created some nominal, this is the way we do it in analog stuff. And it's a very, very simple concept to do. We do it in the analog world every single day. Audio and video. We don't do it in this world yet. So, the next thing I want to look at, and I told you there's going to be 8 components here, so that's the first one we're looking at. The next one is, I hate root. How many people hate root? Oh, other people like root. What? OPM loves root. Perfect example. Root, I still get kind of surprised as to why we even still have root, but I got to take you on a short Boolean trip right now, just to make sure everybody's up to speed on Boolean logic. Everybody understands. We're going to be dealing primarily with AND gates and OR gates. Very, very simple. An OR gate is either A or B, gives a high output on C. In an AND gate, both A and B have to be high in order to get a high on C, and the corresponding truth tables. Boolean 101. Now, the world as we live in it now, are you guys remembering Boolean? Is that it? High on C, high on life. This is the world we live in today. multiple administrators that have root control because you have to. Because Bob's only there 8 to 5, and then Mary's there from 5 to midnight. Then you got the and so there's multiple root sharing going on. It's just the nature of the beast. So what we currently have is an OR gate right there. But more typical of the enterprise would be an OR with some number of inputs to it, however many people you're actually giving access to. So what happens? We're going to get into some trust factor stuff a little bit later, but do we believe in trust? Is every administrator the same? Do you trust Bob just as much as you trust Mary? Maybe, maybe not. But what ends up happening is when we, and I'll show you how to do trust factors a little bit later, when you take trust factors and calculate them into an OR gate, it becomes a probabilistic answer, and it ends up, simple answer, your security becomes measurably lower than the lowest level of trust you have in the weakest person in the chain. And the math all proves that out, as I'll show you a little bit later. But conceptually, this is one of the reasons why we have so much trouble with what's going on now with root. So how do we solve the root problem? Well, some people say it's pretty darned obvious. What we're going to do, how many of you trust your wife or spouse to write a check for unlimited money? A lot of hands went down on that one. I love it. Do you trust your wife with your life? Yeah. So if your kids and she is threatened with their lives, would she sacrifice yours? Now we have an analog function. Yeah, well, the well is called an analog function. Everybody has a breaking point. Have no friend, no kids? I'm giving you kids. Now you've got the kids. Everybody has a breaking point. And this concept of writing 2 signatures on a check is not uncommon. A lot of financial institutions do it. And it's called the 2-man rule. No biggie. We do it, many of us probably do this on a daily basis. So let's apply the 2-man rule to root, and it's all solved, right? So in this case, I need metal man and the trustworthy guy both to authorize the change in order to get my desired Boolean output of a yes, let's go. What? How am I introducing denial of service? So if I can convince A never to push the button, but why is that denial of service? So it's not denial of service in the way we think of it. You're saying denying the ability to actually take this action or confirm this choice. Okay, fair enough. So A makes it, he never does it, so nothing ever happens. Fine. How do I fix that? What else is wrong with this? All right, so we got guys going around with guns in data centers. Cool. What are you, from Texas? Yeah. Hold on, we're getting to the nukes. We're getting to the frickin' nukes. Jesus. You're just like, have you seen this before? We're getting to the nukes. Chill. So what's wrong with this? He's close. One word. What's wrong? No? You have collusion in the OR world, too. Time. Metal man makes a choice. It's not going to happen. He's under panic. Business says, I need this now. He's on lunch break. Time. So the 2-man rule doesn't work in this particular case. So how do I get around that? Well, we got to get back to balance. From the world we live in to the world that is optimum of perfect 2-man rule, synchronicity, time, and all that, which is not realistic. How do we get around it? The concept of trust becomes very, very significant here. So right now, we trust every one of our administrators 100%. They are trustworthy because there was a background check on them, right? What does a background check mean? You know what they're what? How do you know my breaking point by doing a background check on me? You know potential weaknesses, all right? What else? You haven't been caught. is the only thing it means. Damn, how are you? You're late, get out. I'll see you later. So it means you haven't been caught, and you got, is admin A and admin B, are they of all of equal trust? So one of the things that we do not do is apply the concept of analog again, of weighting factors. This is the way the brain works. I was talking about synaptic weighting. Same sort of thing. Now, this is only good inside of a particular company to be self-consistent. It's not going to apply to everybody. So what criteria do you really, really, really care about when you're hiring somebody that's going to be potentially a mission-critical role? So I've put up a whole mess of things here and given them various values based upon just some numbers I threw out to make the point, and that however you're going to weight it is up to you. And then you can look at them in different ways, and you come up with weighting factors and ultimately a trust factor. Now, the way I've structured this is to make it clear is in case number 1, we've got a super, super high concentration in technical competence and past job history, and everything else we really don't care about, which gives him, in this particular case, a trust factor of 0.918. Cool. Now, if case number 2, different company perhaps, looks at the world differently, what do they really care about? They really care about how long you've been at the job, and have you ever done anything illegal, and then your commitment, let's see, psychological profile. They care more about that and obviously not about technical competence. So the trust factor for putting somebody into a technical job sinks way down to 0.772. This becomes very, very important when we go back to that prior one where we're doing the ORs, showing how ultimately if I took these 2 guys and put them into my AND situation, I'm going to end up with, my OR situation, I'm going to end up with a substantially lower trust factor for the combination of the 2. Oh, clearances. That's a whole nother discussion entirely. Have you ever read my paper called Hiring the Unhireable and Why It Fails? Go take a look. Hiring the Unhireable. Those are completely binary discriminators. If there is any place in the world that applies not this, it's the clearance process. Have you ever smoked weed? You're out. You still smoke weed. You're out. Did you ever do this? You're out. It's the binary thing that I went through with being colorblind. It was an arbitrary discriminator. Take a look at hiring the unhireable. If you don't pass the personality test with the fat ass HR lady, no offense to HR ladies if there's any in the room, you're not going to get the job. You're not going to get past it. There's binary discriminators in so many areas. And I appreciate where you're coming from, but damn, they're probably the farthest behind. In fact, a lot of that work came out of stuff I was doing for DHS about 4 years ago, showing them how to turn it more into an analog function. So, in this case, it shows how to do weighting factors as you're applying for trust. Now we're going to go to something entirely different and start gluing some of these things together. Everybody know what OODA is? Some of it, okay, some of you do, some of you don't. OODA Loop was designed by Colonel John Boyd, 1984-85, Maxwell Air Force Base. And basically, it was how to survive and fight in dogfights in planes. So, real simple. Observe what's going on. Orient yourself to the rest of the world. Make a decision. Take an action. Do it again. Do it again. It's a loop, therefore called the OODA Loop, which is the same thing we do in marketing. Come up with an idea for a product. Test market it. Make it blue. Try to sell them. Get customer response. Now make it red. And it's the continuous cycle there that goes on. But the thing that we don't address, and John did not address explicitly, was what I call squeezing the loop, where it's all about time. That loop is going to have a certain level of efficiency. This one is going to have a little bit more efficiency until I'm approaching, again, an analog function. I want to approach 0. The faster that I can make this loop work reliably, the better off I am, regardless of the situation that I'm in. Regardless of the environment, if it's virtual or physical, absolutely does not matter. And this is where we get into some granularity concerns as well. Inside of each of these, you can have a number of subloops, because each observation may have a number of criteria. Each decision may have a number of criteria associated with it. So we can do the subloops, and again, I'm not going to get into all the math on this one at all. But conceptually, what this does is lead us into the core concept behind how to make time-based security and analog network security work, the concept of feedback. So I grew up in the acoustic world, so we've all heard squealing microphones. All that is called positive feedback. And it sounds awful. Anybody know what this is? For what? Steam engine. It's a steam engine governor. And we put them on trains so that we don't have runaway conditions. This is an electrical, in this case, negative feedback. That's how amplifiers work. If you have no feedback in an amplifier, it becomes completely unstable. The generic model for any feedback system is down there. The key concept behind feedback is avoid chaos and avoid runaway conditions. How are our networks doing today? We never have any problems. It's like, what the fuck? Reboot it and it works and whatever next. We don't know. I mean, we reboot. What was it on the IT crowd? Have you turned it off and turned it back on again? Thank you. Thanks. Fixed. We don't know. But feedback is both good and bad. Negative feedback is good. Positive feedback in general is bad outside of certain cases I will specifically show you. So what we care about in many of these cases is the idea of the tipping point. What sends things crazy? What makes them go crazy? Now, the positive feedback where it works is haptics and learning. And that is a positive feedback versus negative reinforcement. And it's a very well-known thing that's in the educational world, absolutely. We're also using it and applying it, and I don't know if anybody saw this research in the last week. They got monkeys now using mice and talking to computers with brain interfaces. That is cool. So they got the digital stuff, the analog stuff, and then the human interaction stuff all going on. And look, feedback. They're all based upon feedback loops for operations. When we use the mouse and see the screen and the cursor, that's a feedback loop occurring in order to tell us where we are. When we walk, our feet tell our brain where we are and how to maintain balance. It's invisible to us, but it's a very complex feedback loop. We have any of this in networks, in engineering, security? Not so much. A couple great examples of feedback. The Dutch, after their floods in the early 1950s, they said, we can't flood anymore. It's going to cost us the whole country. So they built this whole series of dams and dikes that automatically have a feedback loop into it that's based upon weather, the sea conditions, the wave conditions, all of this stuff, and it completely balances out what's going on in the North Sea and what's going on in their irrigation systems that this all control. So an entire country is using very simple time-based security feedback mechanisms to keep itself alive. So how do we do this? Simple concept using the reference monitor would be, okay, we got a process request. Let it go through. Let it go through. Take that action. But now start a clock. This clock is a decrementing clock. So it'll be set to 1 second, 1 hour, 10 minutes, whatever time you choose. If the second guy does not approve of that action you just approved, within the amount of time that is set in the decrementing clock, that approval is revoked. Everybody get that? Putting an analog feedback in a digital decision tree, that policy will determine how long approval is required to take place. Any questions on that? I'm seeing some confusion in a couple of eyes. Fairly simple concept here, but it's starting to get some of these bits all glued together. I'm sorry? It doesn't matter whether it's compliance, it could be mathematical stuff at the code level. This could be down to bits. Doesn't really matter. This is a pure abstraction. So you can apply this at the code, you could do it at applications. I'll show you some of these things a little bit later. Yeah. Thank you. That's your execution time. In this case, is your protection time, and the clock time is D plus R. Exactly. You're way ahead of it. Very good. Spot on. So, what does this look like in the real world? This is another way of viewing it. Metalman approves. It happens. Now B is given notification. He has to approve before the decrementing clock winds down in order to avoid revocation of that particular action. So in the two-man rule, this is a very simple process that will work, and again, in this case, there's math behind it I'm not going to bore you with about his trust factor, and how that contributes to your total overall exposure time and the risk that's tied into it. Yeah? No, if the clock is decremented and B has not approved what A does, the action is revoked. You have instant action and a decrementing amount of clock time for approval. What? Before it's undone, revoked, whatever. Yes, exactly. And again, this could be done at any level. Now, you live with one of these right now. If you've turned it on to your mobile phone, you go to the banking thing, you try to do something, they go, wow, we better verify that this is really, what's your name? Vern. Vern? Wow. Isn't that Varney? What was his name? Vern Varney? Yeah, you know what I mean? Yeah. Jim Varney, right. When you do the mobile thing, you say, we got to verify who you are. We're going to text you over at your email. We're going to do your email. We're going to do your phone. And you get a thing that says, this code is only valid for 10 minutes. That's this. Yeah. That was on slide 11, and I asked that question. And that is the correct one to keep up. How much damage can you do? You get a hold of my phone and my email address, and it's all open. And how much can you drain my bank account in 10 minutes? Hell yeah. Yeah. All you have to do is, if you have access, again, we're back to the physical access rules here. And I can crack a Mac, sure, if you have physical access. I can crack this if I have physical access. So, I'm calling it a revocation. If you want to call it a race tends to mean something a little bit different, and I'm going to stick to revocation for now. Right. Yeah. You're going to want to take advantage of stuff within the known window of time. Yes, ma'am. Can you shout? Do whatever you... Yeah. Well, this is all going to be determined by policy. Is it going to be consistent across a company? Probably not. It's probably going to have one set of rules for the Uber admins, another set of rules for the sub-admins, something else for users, and each of these should be able to be independently programmable, and I'll show you how this works in a networking environment in a few slides. I can undo anything I can do. Any switch I set, I can unset. Now, does that trigger a subsequent chain of events that is unundoable? Is that the right one there? Irrevocable down the line, that's entirely possible if there's subsequent things in the chain. At this point, we're looking at simple, logical ins and outs at one stage of it. What you're suggesting is perfect, because we'll get into that, is how many layers of detection do I have? Implying that, and this is where I'm going to give you the preview, defense in depth, useless. Detection in depth is where I'm headed. Detection in depth. But you're asking exactly the right questions. Yes, sir? Detection in depth. You'd want to have, again, depending upon the architecture of whether it's an application or a network, you're going to want to potentially have additional sensors down the line, and I'll show you that in a little bit. Access control, same sort of thing, same process. Now, let's take this and apply it to the reference monitor. In this particular case, system request, pause, ACTs, go, no-go, based upon decrementing clock. So it's taking the old concept of reference monitor and applying it, just like is done with banking apps now. There's a few places that this is actually finally being used. But again, this was published originally in '98, a lot of this work, so it's kind of cool to see some of it happen, finally. Now, we're going to move to a little bit more. Fundamental bit of feedback. Does anybody know what this is? RS flip-flop. Are you an old engineer? I mean, young engineer, sir. You're a double E. All right, so this is making sense to you. Fair enough. It's a flip-flop. RS flip-flop, which is also a bit of memory. 1 bit. That's the fundamentals of everything that we do. It fundamentally looks like this. And simple truth tables, yada, yada, yada. No biggie. In the way this works, real simple, if well, typically this way, you do a set, Q will go high, Q prime will be low. R sets, unsets this, Q goes low, Q prime goes high. Memory bit, 0 or 1, coming out of Q. Everybody got it? What I'm suggesting is that we do this. And I call it a T AND gate, for a T NOR or whatever, is I'm going to do my set. I'm going to enable Q. Q prime is going to go high, process occur, begin the decrementing clock based upon countdown value that is set policy administrative level. One set of logic that implies my clock ran out. Audio, video, dude. What did I kick? There's a gazillion things down here to kick. This was a binary function, in case anybody was curious. It took time to happen. Exactly. You start screwing with people's heads about it. When you start doing time into every question, answers start appearing. My back, thank you. I'll only do it a few more times. So what I did is created a logical thing. I made this up. I don't know. I may have to do something different. And then created a set of truth tables for the various conditions that exist based upon the countdown clock. And we end up with something that's a little bit more complex, but it gives us a discrete set of answers based upon time. And that time variable is policy and administratively set, not by me. So you wanted to launch a nuke, right? What was your name again? Bruce? Rich. Okay, you want to launch a nuke. Don't answer. How do you launch a nuke? I was pointing at her. I know. How do you launch a nuke? Don't listen to him. No idea how to launch a nuke. All right, go.
So you have a
series of codes. TKS 1803. Isn't that it from War Games or something? You have a set of keys. 2 individuals. There's the circuit. It takes 2 fundamental bits of what I just did, 2 separate clocks, and that creates the window. No way to unlaunch. That's a separate circuit with a self-destruct. I'm not going Dr. Strangelove with you now. You may be right. I don't know. This was a quick thing 3 nights ago, but I think it was an OR because of the feedback that occurs in maintaining Q high. I'd love to go over that with you later if I'm wrong. Well, the thing that shows up out of this, which is interesting, not applicable to the nuke world, thankfully, but what ends up, I may have a slide on this coming up. Well, here it is. We've got 2 sets of times here. Now, in the nuke launch world, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm going to presume that both clocks are set the same. So the window is the same, regardless of whether A or B initiate it. However, there's other possibilities where A and B, the time values, may be different. And I'll be honest with you, I just started playing with that last week, and I have not had time to figure sussing out what it means yet. But it's something that's been fun to explore. And if you've got some answers for me, I'd love to get some ideas from you. And that's where I left it. It was like, okay, if all of these conditions exist, then I've got to add in the trust factors on top of it to see what happens, and I don't know the answer yet, so I apologize for that. Now, we're going to take another concept, out of band. Now, I grew up, again, in the analog world, and the analog world, I showed you earlier, was a rheostat and a volume control, fundamentally just adjusting voltage. That's it, across a load. Now, in the 70s, we said, wait a minute, we want to computerize audio. That's a good thing to do, right? So a guy named Paul Buff took some work that had been done earlier in the defense community and came up with a thing called a VCA, voltage-controlled amplifier. Now, what this meant was the audio input, audio output straight ahead, no volume control per se, but you have a separate input with a voltage that will vary the gain of this amplifier from nominally 0 to nominally infinite, whatever the gain range of this amplifier is. And there's the abstraction we used to use. Now, the cool part is something that we don't experience, and I'm going to go to your DOS. I'm finally going to talk about DDoSing. On TCPIP, you got to love it, you got to hate it. Love it because it's somehow it's working in a lot of cases. But it's also explicitly attackable. And it is attackable in many ways because it is one single set of protocols across one layer, layer 1. That wire goes away, it's all done. Your information signal and your control signal are hunking down the same wire. That's a good thing. It's a bad thing, depending upon how you look at it. What happened back here actually ended up being an accidental good thing. All right, we had all this computer functionality we could do and automate mixing. That was great. But if I lost my input, most of the VCAs had what is called a latch, and it remembered the last set voltage, so you didn't lose all of the signal. You might not be able to adjust it, but you didn't lose it. It was at the last condition. And that was really very, very cool for the audio world when things broke, because everything breaks. So that principle started playing around with everything that we have in TCPIP, which is all in-band. It's all one path, same protocol, everything, and we know how to exploit a lot of it, and we know cutting the wire is really, really efficient. So I'm going to bypass that slide. This becomes ultimately the abstraction for the concept behind applying time-based security and feedback and out-of-band conditions. So we have an asset, whatever it is. We're going to monitor it. It could be a single bit. It could be an API output. It could be anything. It could be a heat sensor. I don't care what we're monitoring. You're detecting something. And the clocks are obviously going to be running everything, and this is the internal decrementing clock. Decision is going to be made based upon time. How am I going to apply that? Am I going to have a reaction matrix by which am I going to automate it? Is it going to be a human involved? And then ultimately there's going to be a reaction. Now this emulates in many ways the asynchronous methodology used by Anderson's reference monitor. And I also mentioned, okay, if we're going to take the reference monitor and make it synchronous, it gets more complicated because I've got a return channel. And the return channel, I'm going to talk to my reaction channel. Something's going to happen. And I'll show you how the macro reaction works as well. Everything is talking, and then ultimately the reaction channel is going to come back and then for enforcement. Yes? I'm sorry? No, it's pure reaction. That's pure reaction. The decision has already been made. The decision has been made to take a reaction. Decision process is right down here, emulating Anderson. All this is doing is saying, yes, it has been done. This is the confirmation of the feedback loop that with the decrementing clock, which is where it all ties together. It's just, in this case, I'm applying the clock to many different components within this notional object. Everybody got that? I know it's complex. Slides are available to anybody. Just email me and I'll send slides and all that. So the reaction matrix, this is, again, something companies don't do very well. I've sat in so many organizations where there's been a breach, an alleged incident, and internal counsel says, call the FBI. That's the correct binary reaction, right? Get the feds, get the cops in on your networks tomorrow. Yeah, good luck. And what they had not done for all the incident responses, plannings that they had in many of the, and these are big financial places in New York, they never examined it from a spectrum of threat. They examined it from a binary function of collapse only. It was an either-or condition, not a spectrum. Again, reintroducing the concept of a reaction matrix with various odd things, and how long should it take, again, tying back to exposure time. All of these components get back involved with time, one way or another. And I've often made the argument that the only metric that ultimately matters in information security is time, but nobody's figured out how to use it yet. And that's when all these pieces started falling together for me, recognizing that, wow, time is in the middle of absolutely everything. Let's see what happens. So, in this case, real simple. I've got my reaction matrix that's occurring, and I got some detection stuff coming down here, and I got my module. Now, this is oversimplified, because the way it's ultimately going to work is going to be a little bit more complex than this. In this case, I got the arrow in the wrong direction. Reaction channel should process everything and then come back and make the decision. That's supposed to be a feedback loop back into the detection mechanisms. So in this case as well, I've got two isolated channels. This would be the internal networks, that'd be my perimeter networks, both of which are creating alarms, alerts based upon whatever it is they have been programmed in order to detect. It's all about speed and time. What is that? A big jet engine. Yeah, it's a GE. It's one of those monster ones for like the 380 or whatever. If you've never stood next to a 380, holy shit, it's amazing. This engine generates a terabyte of data every hour it's in use. It has 5,000 independent sensor feedback-based networks. Points, not networks, points. Which is monitoring and adjusting the performance for optimization 5,000 times every second. You got to speak up. I'm really hard of hearing with all this tinnitus. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Hell yeah. Exactly. That's exactly correct. That's exactly what happens when you, and again, I'm not getting into all of that here, but that's exactly what happens. Your model fundamentally changes. You have a local, oops, and therefore you have to have an internal adjustment. However, it works in airplanes. They do it on flaps, and what was it, the B-1 or B-2 bomber can't fly without 10,000 things a second happening. And if the computers go, but we got 3 computers and then 3 backups of the 3 or whatever it is, there's severe redundancy checking going on at any time. Again, I'm making the argument that from the network security standpoint, we're not looking at the world this way. The industrial world has far surpassed this. Look at the work of GE and Siemens. Holy crap, it's amazing. Yes? Well, if they still have the entertainment systems connected to avionics, he's right.
So that's the problem. The problem is you have to have authentication.
What is the difference in a network between an attack and bad coding? That's it. I don't care who the actor is. It's an external threat to this is a bird. By which we run the planet. Hell yes it is. Here. That's why it has to be synchronous. And that's why that model has the outbound decision matrix with the reaction confirmation coming back in to be able to complete the feedback loop. Of course it does. No, I'm not saying from an outbound signal. I'm saying the detection has to come from a sensor. Time-based decision matrix occurs, confirmation back. And that's the detection reaction matrix that's time-based. Detection in depth is what I'm arguing that we are not doing. And I don't get it. It's very simple, and I break it down fundamentally to 4 categories. And I'm no coder, but I understand I used to do some Fortran back in the 1920s or something. But when we look at granularity, it becomes really, really interesting. What's the only perfect crypto system? One-time pad, which has a 1-bit to 1-bit relationship. So we have a Shannon limit of how low can my detection, how granular can my detection really be? You could do it theoretically 1 bit on 1 bit every time, but that's clearly insane. However, how granular should the detection be within code? I don't know that answer. Hopefully really smart people will be able to start figuring this out, and maybe that'll be at the application stuff where it has its own internal detection reaction matrix for behavior at various levels within the stack, and then have standard APIs that are running out. Again, we're not going to get rid of IPv4 or IPv6 or any of the crap we currently have. We know what we're throwing at it right now isn't working, and I'm suggesting that we add on a completely separate layer to this that is about detection in depth. Now, when we look at solving denial of service, I know you've been harping on this for hours. It's cool. So in this case, we got a target victim, and we have some sort of detection reaction system going on. In this case, he goes, oh crap, I'm under attack. Now, typically today, Bob at AT&T is going to call Mary over at Verizon or whoever the tier 1 guys are. You seen this traffic? Okay, I got this. All right, stop that. Thank you very much. And then if we're having DDoS, you got multi-vector attacks that are going on. But in this case, if I'm under attack and my channel, my single wire channel is overloaded, obviously cannot use that as a security channel. So we have to go out of band, call Mary, do something out of band because the primary is down in order to get some sort of action, some sort of remediation. Now, when we expand this concept, imagine every ISP, right now the relationships at tier 1, tier 2 ISPs, there's what, between 5 and 10 primary relationships that exist. So we're not looking at a huge number of many-to-manys here at all, or one-to-manys. What if every ISP on the planet agreed upon a detection reaction matrix that when certain conditions exist, the reaction matrix says go out of band for communication? Now we know that a DDoS attack has source address. Well, I'm seeing this traffic. It sucks. I want to get rid of it. Out of band communication to the next reaction detection module down here. It is detecting the reaction coming from here. That'll initiate a lookup of those particular offending traffics, start that, and then it can continue as it goes through the hops. Am I going to get the bad guy? Not if he's smart, but I will be able to find some number of source points by which the traffic can be shut down, farther down the chain. So if the internet only had a detection reaction matrix model on the back end of it, DDoS and spam goes away. In DDoS, if everybody plays and I'm seeing nasty traffic, I should be able to shut that down in milliseconds. You're talking about multiple vectors. You're talking about the detection reaction matrix spreading out saying this is all bad shit. Now, was it milliseconds? Is it seconds? I don't know. But again, it's back to the concept of time. Yes? I'm going to know the next hop. Right now, there are vendors that claim to be able to determine bad traffic. I'm not going to go into the detection business, but we've got enough vendors that right now they're saying we can detect DDoS and stop it. They have certain models, and some of its behavioral characteristics, some of its static characteristics. They have a detection that says this is bad. I'm not going to go into that space and try to redefine it. Not my job. They got good algorithms, they're upgrading and all that. If they detect something bad, all I'm saying is that should trigger. That's the primary mechanism for a detection. Something's bad, and I'm suggesting a reaction matrix where people are actually communicating with each other. At some point it is digital. An IP address is digital, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. You're never going to get to zero. All right, fair enough. All right, you're never going to hit zero on anything. No. No, that's why I'm here, for you to beat the shit out of me and buy me a beer later. I'm getting hot. That's the only reason I'm here, for the fucking beer. What? What? All right, now here, there's your payment. The battle of the clocks, isn't it? That's exactly it. And by using a feedback mechanism, you're trying to avoid the race condition that you're bringing up exactly. And I grant the point of saying all versus approaching zero. I bow in your almost humble direction. But that's why I'm here. Thank you. No, I did. And if you don't do it, then it's on you. Thank you. What? I don't have time. I don't have time, Tony. So ultimately, what this fundamentally looks like, okay, there's our existing world. Up there, none of this exists yet. That's what lives. What I'm suggesting is adding this. Were you here for the defense in depth slide number 7? All right. You want to add another layer, depending upon your sensitivity? You add another layer of defense in depth using the same concept on the detection routing here. But hold on, here's the point. Let's say some vendor builds this. Why should I not have an equivalent layer of this built on this, this, and this? Again, we're talking about limit functions here, limiting damage versus the full exposure time that we currently have of an unknown. Welcome to the world of network security. Always got a job. So there is the theory behind it all. This is a very low bandwidth back channel or out of band comm, very low band. We're not moving any real information. We're moving control signals effectively. And at some point, somebody, I'm certainly not going to be the one to do it. What do we want to design this to look like? I don't know the answer. But hopefully somebody may gravitate toward this, and what should a security, out-of-band security channel be? What information needs to be shared across a backbone? And I got some, some ideas, but I'm certainly no protocol designer. I'm not going to claim to be. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Both of which are bad decisions by definition. How's that differ from where we are now? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Exactly. Well, essentially, that's what the threat matrix people and threat analysis companies are doing today with the out world looking in versus doing it internally. Well, that's part of the reaction matrix. At what point in the automated detection process does it get elevated to a human, either as a stop-pause condition or as an approval condition? And one is a binary way of doing it, and one is a feedback mechanism method of doing it. Which one do you want? And I'm not going to make that decision for any company. Yeah, we're not going there. I can't solve that problem because that's a reaction matrix decision based upon policy. It's an option. At what point do you bring in a human, and is he brought in as part of the stop pause in a chain, or is he in part of an internal feedback loop for approval, disapproval, and therefore having some level of exposure time? That's a policy decision, not mine. All of my job is to give you some options. I don't care which way you do, which way you want to do it. It's going to depend upon the scenario. In some cases, you're going to want to stop it. Done. In some cases, you're going to go, yeah, let it go and let me take a look. Okay? Well, we've been discussing having the other attack vector with out-of-band communications, absolutely. And then that was where the add another, if you are that level of security aware and concerned, add another reaction matrix on top of your reaction matrix, back to the defense in depth concept. Yeah, that's going after the house. It's going after the alarm system of the house before you break in. It's exactly what it is. It would, of course it would. That's the defense in depth when you're applying multiple layers in time-based security. You would have the time-based security formula coming down off of the detection or reaction component. Sure. Absolutely. How granular do you want to get? Now, as we get close to the end of this, I'm going to introduce yet another concept that will hopefully mess with your minds. We're going to play with negative time. I love those eyeballs. Again, this comes back to my work in the audio industry. We had a thing, remember back in the, I guess, Led Zeppelin, A Whole Lot of Love. You hear all these. Those are called digital delays. And we had various ways of doing it. Originally, it was you'd have a series of tape machines in the room, and you'd string a piece of tape around 10 machines, and put an input on one of them, and then read it sampling down tape machines, and you varied the delay by how close and far away the tape machines were from each other. And it was all time-based distance of tape moving at so many inches per time unit. Then Richard Factor invented the digital delay line with early digital circuits. And this is what a digital delay line fundamentally is. It's a series of bit mover registers, nothing more. What if we introduce negative time into some of these concepts? What happens? Well, we go back to where we are here. This is the reference monitor doing this whole thing as we were talking about earlier. So we have that reference point. But what if, in this particular case, system request pause process? Pause is set by policy clock, decrementing clock. Over in the side, we do our thing, make a decision, and come back. That pause is effectively a digital delay line, saying, hold on a second, or hold on a minute, or hold on 30 microseconds. So, what this tells us is, we know what detection time is, we should know. Should be able to know reaction time, and we know that protection time of firewalls, whatever, is indeterminate. But now we're going to add negative time to it, and that's just delay line time. So, detection time plus reaction time, subtract delay line time, it's going to be less than 0. Which means then that protection time is defined by the sum of detection plus reaction as enforced by delay line time. What does that mean? What? An example I came up with was how to stop phishing, because this is the one that we all give a shit about. So, user clicks on stupid shit. Delay set by policy. That delay time is determined by how long it takes the vendor to look up, analyze, and make a decision. DT plus RT. This is done out of band on his appliance, whatever. He says, provably, arguably, provably I can do it all in 30 milliseconds. All right, then we're going to set this to 40 milliseconds. The user at 40 milliseconds ain't going to see any behavioral change. What does this do to the world of phishing? One possible application for gluing all of these concepts together. Am I saying it's right? I don't know. I mean, it's looking pretty darn good conceptually. And if we could get rid of phishing, which is why I picked on it, it would just solve so many of our problems these days. We know how to look at files. We know how to look at code. We know how to do analysis, but we're doing it wrong right now. Because all I'm saying is take some of these time-based concepts, introduce a negligible. How long does it take to open that PDF? A user doesn't frickin' know. Is the URL any good that I'm clicking through to? Well, we have pretty good high-confidence answers to that stuff right now. But the current way we're doing it is allowing them to go through. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So I don't have any more applications than this. I want you guys to come up with that shit. The odd part is that this is not my area of expertise, but while I was doing research and studying, I discovered the virtual queue stability theorem. Basically, that's load balancing in networks. And it turns out that so much of what I'm talking about has been min-max condition. Greater than 0, less than infinity. Greater than 0, less than 1 if we're talking in absolute terms. There is no such thing as either or, absolute, and all of that. And when you look at this, these are the same equations that are being used that is done for load balancing on networks currently, which was rather amazing for me to, it was like, damn, I didn't know any of that shit. And it's all min-max conditioning. Nothing fancy at all. So, what else can this do? I don't know. I got a lot of ideas. IoT scares the living shit out of me. And we're building this whole new universe on the same old crap that we know is broken. IoT, I would argue, with some sort of detection, reaction, channel mechanisms built in, might offer us a little bit of hope. Likelihood of it happening tomorrow, about as close to zero as you can possibly get in a functional limit. Looking at these, how do we stop bots? Can this approach stop them? I don't know for sure. I want some researchers to take a look at some of this stuff. We know that this will add resilience, dynamic resilience, and dynamic adaptability, especially through bandwidth compression as one of the techniques. Again, an analog mindset. Enhanced two-factor stuff. We're seeing some of it, but damn, why aren't we using that in enterprise? Why don't we use enhanced authentication enterprise? We're still using passwords. Seriously? Really? Oh, shut up. No, he was saying people don't want to carry around more than one password or manage a password vault. Duh, sorry. Again, I'm going to make the argument that we as the creators, the high priests, for the last 40 years of this crap, it's our fault. We're giving users really, really hard stuff to use. They buy a computer. What should I do? Well, first you have to use a VPN if you travel. What's a VPN? And you need the antivirus, but that comes with the machine. No, not if you. And you go through the whole litany of everything you need to do to protect yourself. A user is better off saying, fuck it. Why do I want to get online at all? I mean, when you help your friends, I mean, all right, I'll give you the 3 things and you're screwed anyway, is ultimately what it comes down to. Unless you really know. We've made this stuff too frickin' hard. Well, that's why you go back to slide 89 or whatever. These are... Don't even start with me on next generation shit. These are some of the things that I use as memes when I'm talking and I'm thinking about problems. I've been so immersed in this now, heavily writing it now for about 18 months and trying to sort this out. As soon as I hear things and people talking about problems, I say, well, what's the time element of this? Where's the risk? And now you're looking at it from binary. How do we transition your question into something that's meaningful in an analog way to perhaps give a different answer? I'm not saying the other answer is necessarily going to be right. It's back to that wave-particle duality metaphor I made earlier. Different ways of looking at the same problem provide inherently different answers. And that's all I've really been trying to do with this project. So, end of pitch, buy the damn book. That's going to help pay for the last 14 years of my life. There's all the stuff, and the criticisms have been welcome. Thank you very, very much on some of these. Some of the input that you gave on some of the feedback and the weighting mechanisms into the trust factor, I'm going to incorporate and see how that fudges out, and it perhaps does with some of those uncompleted formulas I was not working on. So that's the concept behind analog network security. I hope everybody uses the word analog and time in every discussion that you have throughout this week and chaos. Somebody says to you, well, how's the analog time function going to influence that? And you just fuck with their heads, but you'll find it's really educational to come up with different viewpoints. So end of rant, end of pitch, almost time to start drinking beer. I'm here to answer any more questions or fight with you. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Thank you. The book, I was supposed to release it 4 years ago, but it kept, it'll be out in January. It'll be out for RSA.
Oh, cool. How are you doing publishing on it?
I've had my own publishing company for, I'm only going to sell 10,000 copies. I'm not trying to reach people.